Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Erica Blair. As Maureen mentioned, I am a program manager with the Rural Grocery Initiative. So in full transparency, this is not my area of expertise. I do not engage in this type of work very much, not at all, in fact. So my role today is really to kind of interpret the questions that are posed to this breakout session, keep track of the conversation, take notes, and just move the conversation forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to show you all the question that we will be talking about in this breakout session. The question is, how do you meet with and build connections with industry? So I think this is really a two-part question, to be honest. I think the first part of the question is asking, what are the logistics of making those connections? How are you actually meeting these industry contacts, right? Is it a conference that you're attending? Is it a colleague who is making the introduction? How are you initiating that connection, first of all? And then the second part of the question is about building the connection. How do you cultivate that relationship with your industry colleagues? So I think we could start the conversation just by looking at maybe the first part of the question. I'm interested in just hearing your personal experience. How has this played out for you? So feel free to unmute yourself. I think we can just kind of popcorn this discussion. When you unmute yourself, if you could just, first of all, state your name and your area of study, that would be great. I think we have a very interdisciplinary group with us today. So it'll be interesting just to see where we're all coming from. And then also, please feel free to respond in the chat as well. And I will be monitoring the chat. So with that, I think we can get started, but I want to just acknowledge Dr. Finney is here in the breakout with us. Did that, I know we met earlier, did that seem to represent the question?
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, and I'll add my perspective as we continue, but I'll let others talk first.
Great, perfect. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then, so that we can all just see each other. So I'll just open up the floor to anybody who wants to start by sharing, how do you make these connections initially?
I can go ahead actually, if no one else is going to start. Okay, all right. Well, my name is Bazad. I'm a faculty in geology department, work on fluent transport in porous media, hydrology, hydrogeology. Honestly, based on my personal experience, I found it very difficult in Manhattan area because we don't have much industry around us. Most of things happening in Wichita and Kansas City. The best way I found it was like reaching out through LinkedIn by dropping a message, or even writing an email to someone that I could forward me to someone actually in the company. In most cases, they didn't go through, or after the first trial, it didn't go through. Honestly, I think someone shouldn't give up based on my experience. I have personal experience with Saudi Aramco. But it was happening through my connection. So I reached out to my connection. I said, here is the idea I have. Do you know anyone in the company who might be interested in this idea? And then I got a connection. I talked to that person. He found it interesting, and they motivated me to write a 2-page proposal. I submitted that. It didn't go through actually the first time because the company didn't have money at the moment. But 6 or 8 months later, actually, they'd reach out to me and say, hey, the proposal was funded. So here's the money you got, and so on and so forth. But honestly, like I said, we don't have much industry or industrial things happening in Manhattan area. I would say people in agronomy, they are pretty successful because it's all farms around us. But when it comes to other stuff, it's very difficult, specifically reaching out to companies in Kansas City and Wichita. It's very good to actually have a face-to-face meeting and talking to them and ask them what kind of problems they have. Based on my understanding, we need to understand what their problems would be like and try to address what they need. They pay for whatever solves the problem, not for whatever we want or whatever we feel like that would be fantastic or exciting. Just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I'll kind of add to that last little bit that you mentioned. And one thing I was gonna talk about if it presented itself was a tool or a framework that we use internally, both here at Bay State and even before when I was at Cargill, to help kind of define what the problem is. And it's a framework that's called Jobs to be Done. And it really looks at what is the job that this technology is intended to do. And if you go through the process, it kind of really helps distill it down to what function does it have. And one of the traditional examples that some of the framework uses is the growth of smoothies or milkshakes during being consumed. And this was a number of years ago was a big trend for that. And people thought that the way to innovate around that was improving flavors or whatever else, but they didn't realize that the purpose of those smoothies was really for people that were commuting to work to be able to drive through and grab something that they could hold with one hand and drink and feel like they were kind of fulfilled throughout the morning. So all the innovation around flavor and things like that, they only kind of worked. But when you really focus on what the real purpose or the real job of that the technology is, that's when it can be utilized. And I'm sure there's better examples that could be more applicable to your guys' areas of expertise, but that framework should be somewhat universal, and that'll help you with having dialogues with industry about what their needs are and how that can apply to their end customers.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
This is Jim Gillard. I'm a professor in the Department of Animal Sciences. I had somewhat of an advantage coming into the university in '95, insofar as I had spent 6 or 8 years in private industry. And part of that was in an R&D capacity, working with a lot of private label customers. And so I had developed a pretty good network of fellow scientists and really looking at applied technologies. And so when I landed here at Kansas State University, there was a pretty good base of people to work with. That probably gave me some degree of confidence, and just picking up the phone and doing a cold call where we thought we had some technology that might be of interest to an outside party. And so in many cases, that's how I've made the connections. Just try to do a brief survey of who's working in what space, and approach representatives of corporations to gauge their interest in technologies that we're working on or developing here. And so that's, I would say, worked pretty well for us. Most of what we do in our group is in one way or another supported by or underwritten by an industry partner. So I guess it's worked. So
Great. So some of the methods that I've heard so far have been LinkedIn, sending direct messages, cold calling, utilizing the networks that you already have from previous experience. Oh, it looks like you're muted.
So I would say I've used many of those, probably not so much of the social networking. I'm not a social networker, so I rely a lot on the telephone and face-to-face stuff myself. So, and more recently Zoom, I guess. So.
Looks like there's somebody who's trying to chime in, but we're not able to hear you still. Sorry.
We can't
That's
hear you,
Mary
Mary
Lou.
Lou.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, would anybody else like to add to that? Other strategies?
I'm not sure if this is a strategy, but one thing is persistence. And so I think prioritizing that there's a potential connection, I think is one of those where like you just, yeah, I know you think I look at funding rates for most grants is between 4 to 10%. Right. And so if you look at, you know, it's not just gonna be one industry connection and all of a sudden this magically happens. Like you're gonna have to like leverage every potential resource that you have. And that might mean going to a invited seminar at some college who, right, has maybe a new network of people that can then give you maybe some industry contacts. So to me, I've kind of leveraged every single, like, yeah, we leverage our networks, but with this idea of kind of, it's not going to happen just magically. There's some level, I have to prioritize this as a potential, like either new avenue for research, or it's a connection that I'm trying to, again, it's an odds thing, to be honest, at least my take on it. And so this, you know, we chase grants, not maybe we don't chase them, but we try to get grants. We try to be competitive. It's not a guarantee, nor are, at least my experience, industry contacts. So trying to be persistent in that, I think, is also on how I kind of approach it. Is just realizing it's not going to be one, it's going to be probably 20 before I get 10%, whatever the percentage is.
Yeah, well, I did see the little alert that we have 5 minutes remaining. So I wanted to move on to that second part of the question on building those relationships, cultivating those relationships. Does anybody have experience related to that? Strategies?
I mean, when I look at a lot of my academic connections, and I have a few of them I actually met as a student, right? So I think viewing this this effort as a dynamic and, you know, long-term process, I think is beneficial, where, you know, in 5 years the people that you're teaching or even hiring to do dishes in your lab might also be a source of funding for some projects. And one person in particular really kind of stood out in my mind is, you know, he was very open during my PhD research. He invited me to his lab to learn some unique techniques, and he didn't have to. He just did it just because he was trying to help me out as a student, and that really fostered really, now it's been 15 years of work with him. So I think thinking about it as a long-term approach is also good.
I think what I can add to that would be going to conferences, specifically wherever there are showcases and so on and so forth. So wherever companies actually showing up, going to those meetings and conferences would be good, and try to get to introduce yourself, talk to them, and even ask for appointment, go to their offices and talk to them face to face. Sit with them actually, and get that connection. Even if you have to drive all around Kansas to get that connection, that would be worth it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm Ganga Hettiarachchi from, I'm a soil chemist in Department of Agronomy. From my experience, I think industry focus meetings, like in my area, I know that fluid fertilizer forum. So there's a lot of fertilizer industries come there. So presenting your research you do sometimes actually kind of make a way to them to approach you, or you to approach them, and build those kind of relationships, and get working together with the industry. Mary Lou, did you try to say something? We did not hear you.
If you want to try adding it to the chat, that might be what we need to do. There is one, okay, we have 1 minute left, but we did receive another tip here in the chat. utilizing alumni, risk management, student fellows to make industry connections. Thanks, Emily. Okay. Well, with that, I am going to stop the recording. Thank you so much for this discussion. And I think they're gonna send you off to a new breakout in just a moment. So
Thanks, Erica.
thank you. And I'm going to share my screen so we can take a look at the next question. So the question is, how do you meet with and build connections with industry? And I really think that this is a two-part question. I think the first part of the question is asking, what are the logistics of actually making the connection? Where are you making these connections? Are you going to conferences? Are you being introduced by colleagues to other, colleagues within industry? So how do you, first of all, make that initial contact is the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is asking, how do you build those connections? How are you cultivating those relationships? So, Dr. Shalito, does that sound right to you based on our conversation the other day?
I think so.
Okay, great.
It's sort of following on a little bit from what we were just talking about. So it's not.
Okay.
It's actually a good segue.
Great. Well, I think we could get started then, and feel free to unmute yourself, and we can just popcorn, have a popcorn conversation. Just remind folks, we have a very interdisciplinary group. So if you just want to, actually, you may have already introduced yourself in the previous breakout session, but if not, just state your name and your area of study. So let's start with that first part of the question. What are some strategies? What's your experience with meeting industry contacts? How do you make that initial connection? And we'll just go from there.
So do you want to close your share so we can see?
Yep, sure.
To remind you, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have a story of anybody that we've already heard from two of you? Do we have any stories from anybody else about meeting industry? Or?
Yeah, I can give some of my experience.
Yeah,
sure. My name is Mithila Jugalam. I'm a professor in the agronomy department. My background is in molecular weed science. I do basic research in weed science, specifically looking at weed and herbicide interaction. So obviously, I have, I need industry connections because of my area of expertise. So since I started my job here at K-State about 11 years ago, I've been working with industry. I worked with BASF, Corteva, Syngenta, and also the FMC companies. So my connection with industry actually happened like you suggested, Erica, through a colleague. So we have in our department 4 weed scientists, but each one with a different expertise. So the extension weed scientists who actually work in the field, more applied aspects, they have regular connections with industry. So they are the ones, and I first started, connected me with, for example, Syngenta or BASF folks, because why it was important for industry as well as for me as a starting academic, starting my job in academic institution is that, so Kansas, I just want to give a little bit of background about the Kansas cropping systems and what kind of issues we have in weed science. The herbicide molecules that are used for weed management are manufactured by obviously the industry folks. And in Kansas, we have a lot of weeds that have resistance to those herbicides. So for example, we have resistance to dicamba, which is manufactured by BASF, and also we have resistance to mesotrione manufactured by Syngenta. So when I started, that resistance in weeds was a major concern for industry because their products obviously are not going to work for weed management. And my expertise, like I mentioned, was in basic weed science. So they are interested in me to look at what exactly is making that weed not able to be controlled by their product, basically the mechanism. I do on molecular level as well, why these plants are surviving. So in that regard, the extension folks connected me with industry where their interest was to, for me to look into the area that they wanted me to work with. So that was my first connection with industry. And then to answer your next question, how do you build your, how do you extend your work with the industry? So that's a very, very important thing to me, in the sense when you first establish collaboration, the working relationship with industry is very critical. Once you establish good relationship, and I know if you produce quality research, they will actually keep you in mind and come back to you. It's all about, the initial establishment. So recently, again, I have been contacted by Syngenta folks. They wanted me to work with some other aspects of their needs. So it was a good start for me when I just started my job, getting contact through my senior colleagues, and then continue to establish those collaborations.
So that goes back to what was said earlier, I think, where we talked about it may not be you, it may be somebody else, and then delivering. And one of the things that when you do make that original contact is to be able to put succinctly what your strengths are, because those are the things that's being looked for. So anybody else have a story? Short, conscious of time.
Right. So utilizing your network, your colleagues who have connections.
Yeah. Also, like
strategies.
Just want to add something else. I meetings like
we also have. So, for instance, a lot of companies, like Bayer does, BSF, have and I did put it in the chat connection. There's some pages that we have. If you go on to, for instance, BSF, it's the innovations page, and you can actually make contacts through those kind of things. So I know Bayer has one, BSF has one. I don't know about the others, but I guess they do, where you can actually just approach, might say cold call, but one of the things is trying to make sure that you can, and it may be you only have 2 minutes. I always think back to being approached by the CEO at Washington Airport one day and say, "What are you doing here?" You have 2 minutes. So the elevator speech is something to really work on, okay? Because you may only have 2 minutes. So when you're making that original contact, you need to make an impression and say, I work on this. This is my special. We have a strength in this area, such like. So that you may not have a lot of time to have that conversation. On the other hand, it may be, at a conference or something like that. So has anybody here made a contact at a conference with industry that either have been successful or not successful?
Again, the conferences that I go pretty much attended by many folks from industry.
Yeah.
Many of my contacts also happened when I was at a meeting. Either they approach me or I make networking. I go and explain, like you mentioned, what my expertise is, what can we deliver in terms of their need. Yeah, contact.
Anybody else? Do you go to conferences?
Yeah, the conferences are useful.
Yeah.
So I will see you at the Serious and Grains meeting later this year.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, seeing I'm a board member, I have to be there. That's something else you can get involved in. I mean, that's one of the things that is good is if you're active at meetings. So not just a passive, but actually active in organizing the meetings. So for instance, cereals and grains, I think I've organized a session at nearly every meeting in the last 5 years or so, and not last year, but every other year. So that's something that, you know, so I see other people have got their microphones on. Ajay, did you?
Oh, I think, so we have been really successful in the last 5-7 years to work with industry and a very broad set of industry from that standpoint. But my experience has been that initially it takes time for you to have a reputation with industry in terms of what you do, what topics you work on, how visible you are, Mithila was saying as well. But once you establish that connection, then it helps. It opens up the door for you. But the other thing, what I have experienced or what has worked for us is that a couple of times when we were approaching people, yes, we were new. It took us time to kind of establish the connections and contacts, but we were coming with a lot of fundamental information. So I work with machine systems like Deere and CNH and EGCO and Topcon, TJET. Once we got an opportunity to sit in front of those people, then do not hesitate to drive the discussion in terms of what needs to be done. Most of the times, I don't know, at least from our case, a lot of times people don't even know what needs to be addressed or what are the gaps. So if you clearly identify that, demonstrate that with some information or not some information with your past research and all that, once you position that way. So Ray, you were asking, not a conference, but I got accidentally called into an innovation meeting. I knew nobody in that innovation meeting. And then on third, I just planned for a few days. I said like, it's going to be just a fluke. But end of the third day, I was walking out and they say, well, thank you so much. And their global director for innovation said, hey, AJ, we should have our next innovation meeting at K-State. I said like, well, yeah, why not? Yes. And in 3 months, we have 35 people from this company, from patent attorneys to global directors to innovation managers to VPs at K-State for a week. And I think that was the thing where when you get that time, talk to people, and talk relevant in terms of what that person is doing. So knowing as soon as you can get to know what they're doing. But I think the whole idea was that that communication was successful. You should be able to pitch right content, right ideas, right vision for those product development. And I think then things will open. Then they're not going anywhere. They're not only going anywhere because you're always contributing positively. And if you're never going to stop thinking. So you have more and more ideas. Every time you meet with them, you have 2 more new ideas to work with. And then the person thinks that, damn it, like I should have listened to him like 6 months ago. We should have done it and we should have moved on to the next step. So you have to continue impressing, don't think that you have to hold your ideas and all that. No, don't worry about it. Industry doesn't have a whole lot of time to put money and people in all those small projects. So as you continue to pitch, and the other good thing is if you continue to do that, the next time you're going to talk to the industry, your thought process is going to be much more refined. You have added more, some sparkles, some more fancy stuff. You have evolved that idea in terms of next steps and all that. So
that comes back to one of the things that my the university, one of our folks said is basically know your university or your department's capabilities and prepare a serious, honest self-assessment of your strengths in comparison to competition. So think ahead. What are your department strengths? What are your weaknesses? What can you really offer? And then prepare. Because if you just go completely unprepared, you won't get anywhere. So if you're prepared and you understand what you have, and structure if you're going to do a visit, structure the visit so that you can make most of the time and think about how you can present that in a concise and meaningful manner. The average manager within industry basically doesn't want 10 things. They want maximum 3 to choose between. Don't ever give a manager more than 3 choices. That's a rule. And I see you're smiling, Erica, but it's true. But that, you know, be able to express concisely what you want. And I'm a big proponent of what I call the one pager. If you can't describe what you're going to do and why it's important in one page, you don't know what you're doing. You really need to be able to do that. So be concise, be able to put it in one page, and not 3-point type, by the way. One page of 12-point type would be, you know, with structure, to know why it's important, what we can do, you know, what it'll cost. If you can do that, that will get you halfway there, because then you're prepared, because you've thought through it. You know, one of the things you do with meetings is prepare beforehand. And you know, if you're going to a scientific meeting, you're looking to do this kind of thing, think beforehand about this one pager or this structure. And maybe that comes maybe in the next piece, but that's really important to do that preparation. Whenever I'm going to a meeting, I'm doing preparation. I spent more time in preparation this meeting than the meeting will be.
I think another important thing is to consider is that you know, it's working with industry takes a whole lot of time. I think the trust and confidence building can take 6 months, can take a couple of years.
Yeah.
But if you continue to cultivate, so I think I don't know. It all depends on how desperate you are, how much push you want to do it, right?
And I will go ahead and share my screen. So the question that we have now is, how do you meet with and build connections with industry? And I really think that this is a 2-part question. I think that the first part of the question is asking more of the logistics. How do you meet that? How do you make that initial connection? Where are you doing that? Are you going to conferences? Do you have a colleague who is making a connection? Are you leveraging other networks? So what is that process like? What's challenging about that initial connection? What strategies do you have? So I think that's part 1 of the question. And then part 2 is asking, how do you build that connection? So how do you then, once your foot is in the door, how are you cultivating that relationship to make it a long-term relationship with industry? So I think Maureen is in the room. Did that sound right, Maureen, for this question?
Yes, no, that sounds perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think we'll just go ahead and open the floor up, and I think we can just kind of popcorn this discussion, as I'm sure you have been already, and just open it up to anybody who wants to share their experience with this question of meeting colleagues in industry, building those connections. And just a reminder that we have a very interdisciplinary group. I'm sure you've already been doing this, but just a reminder to state your name and your area of study. So would anyone like to start?
I might pick on Arnaud. You may want to maybe give some give some thoughts on how, from an industry perspective, that ice is broken.
Okay, I'm afraid, because it's still the same group, so I'm afraid we already discussed this topic on the previous question. So I was just looking at the question and say, well, we mixed it up.
For some reason, we were in the same group,
So yeah, basically we say that for us the main let's say the main driver for connecting with people are conferences and direct contact. That's definitely where everything starts. So
has anyone had experience with making cold calls? Did you talk about that already? Oh, looks like you're muted, Maureen.
Before we move on, was it the same group with the same question?
It was not the same question, but but we answered basically when it was how do you listen to and learn from the industry.
Okay.
We that's my feeling.
Spoke to it. I see. Okay.
And I'm in the same group with Arnav for all the brief questions, and we kind of shared our success story, in almost all the questions.
You're tired now, huh?
No, I'm not. Yeah.
Let's see.
And we did kind of the cold calls, Erica, but we kind of alluded that during our last breakout session where we, Arnett and Kali has an ongoing collaboration, and they met at the conference. But I asked, what if do you go looking for talent, and it's, they are not saying they would review the publication, and that type of activity to see what talent is out there on a talent search. But Arnaud, would you agree that it's kind of hard to find you if somebody was to just send you a cold email out of the blue? Do you show up on the company's email, and would you be the person they needed to reach out to? So
definitely, I'm sure I'm the person.
But how would they find you? To answer the cold card, that's kind of a tough approach, wouldn't it?
That's a good question. I'm trying to be as much visible as possible. Yeah, as much as I can. Now if I am reachable easily, I don't know. What I do know, if I receive a call, as you said, a cold call or an email, or I will always answer it and as rapidly as possible. And then really depends. If I know, just give you an example, I was contacted recently by research center in France. They had an idea. And as the idea was interesting, so we agreed to have visio and team meeting. So we have been discussing about the project, and finally we did not follow up. I just seen recently it was published in Serial Chemistry, so they are continuing working on that. It's not something that appears to be something we can use for producing a new equipment, even if the idea is interesting. But yes, that's definitely the kind of things I will be answering. And now with the websites and everything from the company, I think we can be reached quite easily. Even if it's not a person, you can at least have an address where you can send your thing. And that's also, I think, depends on the company. We are a company which always trying to find innovations. So of course we need to be caring about that, because we do not want to lose the next falling number of device of this type where they have sold hundreds and hundreds all over the world. It happens in the past that we did not take the right decisions, and it will certainly happen again. So we need to be extremely conscious. So the first thing, yes, is to make all the chances on our side by answering when we are contacted for some reason. Then after, there is maybe another way, which are the long-term partnerships. And with that, I will explain. We have some people in some universities or institutes. We have been working with them for the last 10, 15 years. And because we are working with them, of course, during all this year, they have had PhDs working with them in their teams. And so we got also used to the PhDs, and we know them. And then these PhDs, they've been working somewhere else, which is making new connections. And that's also a way for us to, to increase our network by someone who knows someone who knows someone. That is really, really efficient. If I think now, we have a lot of people that originally were known or identified because they were working with people like in K-State or other sites. So yeah, that's also very important.
Great. Samuel, did you have something to add? I saw that you had unmuted.
Oh no, I've just been that way. But
Okay.
I liked the question that was asked long ago, where we were asked each person should state the value they add to industry collaboration, and we never really answered that question. And I would love to hear what value other people have to add to industry, academia collaboration. And I can start. I think what I've had, and I have been in those all three sessions with Anod. I don't know how that happened, but we ended up in all three sessions. And I was hearing the question of communication gap. Communication gap. That sometimes academics don't know how to communicate the value of the research they're proposing or they're doing. And there's a disconnect between academia and industry in terms of communication. I'm a professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. And long ago, we did a project where we sent journalism students and teamed them up with people who had been granted NSF grants at K-State. Those are wonderful scientists, but horrible communicators. So we teamed up with students so they could speak in understandable ways to people who don't have PhDs, but people who could benefit from their research. We did a project and we won the top storytelling award from NSF. It was a communications project, not a science project, communicating science. And I think that's what I see missing. We do a lot of research here at K-State, but we don't communicate that to the audiences that are not like us. And that's my value proposition as somebody from the School of Communication. That's the value I can bring. I would love to hear what other people have to offer.
I think that's great. Telling the story in the breakout room that I was in previously, there was a lot of discussion about how do we make our story concise as well and try to be succinct with that. So, other thoughts? And how do you make that a long-term partnership too? How do you, once you do have that connection, how do you keep it going? That's the other part of the question.
We keep it going by most of the time by becoming friends, and then we have more and more discussions, very open discussions, which make that we reach a point where as a device provider, I'm not afraid to give a little bit more information because I know it will be treated confidentially. And for instance, if we have an idea of developing something new, I know these people can be a very good place for testing this new idea. And of course, this is making broader a field of potential partnerships. And it happens sometimes that we are doing works with people and testing things, and sometimes they say no, okay, it's not working well, or we could improve that, or so that's, in fact, we are multiplying the potential uses and works, and the more we do and the more ideas we have, and that's a very good cycle. So yeah, and that's the reason why with some people we have been working on project every year since 5-10 years. Yes, that's key.
Yeah, and it does, as I think as Arnaud just suggested, it comes down to building relationships.
Yeah.
And the challenge is the initial introduction, how to make that happen initially in an effective manner, and then building those long-term relationships is the most important.
Yeah, it comes. In fact, we have two things. First of all, it comes gradually. But the first contact is very important. The first contact, and that's where we are going to, again, we have to think that as an industry people, we have people looking at what we are doing and the numbers, and it has to bring value. It has to bring value to the company, which means in our cases, it has to help us selling or promoting or working on the image of the company. So the first thing we are doing is very critical, because once we've done one success, then after the pressure is less intense. We can start working on things which might be a little bit more high level or more tricky. We know we are in good hands, and if tomorrow we need to do something more simple, we can also do it. And once this relationship is established, then it needs to be maintained from both sides. Because of course, if we go elsewhere, maybe the university will feel a little bit alone, and maybe they will have other things to do. So we need to have, yes, contact 2 or 3 times a year. It's not like we are calling every day, but it's important to have regularly contact and try to share new ideas.
There was a question in the chat here from Anusha on, can you explain this for a student? I'm not sure I understand what that question was about. Anusha, do you want to clarify that? And if we get moved out of the breakout session, we can readdress that question in the next section. So can you help us understand what you were asking for there?
Oh, hi, sorry, I didn't complete the questions.
Okay.
I'm hearing that this is for faculty members and industry, I guess. So I'm a student here at K-State, and I want to know everything from the students' perspective as well. So how can students approach to the industry people, and how to make contact with them, and like that.
Okay, we are going to break out in 60 seconds.
Maybe I can give you just a little example, very recent example of someone doing a PhD, and they came to us because she had a question. She was a student doing a PhD research, and she wanted to work on wall width, and she had troubles about finding the right tool. And then we said, well, maybe you should try this tool. And yes, but I am not this tool. Because the research was interesting, we made a loan of the tool for this student during 2 or 3 months, so she could do research on the tool. So at the end of it, she got a PhD. She's very happy, and we are very happy because we have a publication. So do not hesitate. If you have ideas like that, do not hesitate to go providers and ask questions. Sometimes you can have good surprises.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.